Hey, I'm Susan Palmer of Lead Cat Press. This is my studio update. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, you can go to the description box to find the chapter for the section that pertains to whatever it is that you're looking to learn, and you're always welcome to watch the whole thing. Now, these videos that I create, this studio update, these are for my students, my current students that I'm working with. These are things that came up in our weekly lessons, and I like to just give them a little boost throughout the week. So these are things that they can refer to help them maximize our time together. That's something that's really important to me. In my lessons, I do use a method book that I wrote that has gotten a lot of great feedback from lots of great guitar players at Berklee College of Music, Adam Levy. Lots of guitar players really dig this guitar book. It is specifically designed for students who are taking guitar lessons because that is the most effective way that you're going to learn. It's a thick book, you'll see, and right now I'm doing a special on these. For every book ordered from my website, leadcatpress.com, I'm donating $5 to the Seattle Clean Air Collective, and this organization provides free access to air purifiers for musicians in the Seattle area, so that their shows can be COVID safer. I know I'm always looking for ways to stay healthy, and I want music communities to really embody the spirit of music, which is community access, which is sharing music and experiences and being able to involve every people, whether you're immune compromised or you haven't had that experience yet of being sick. So $5 from every book that is ordered from my website goes to those folks who are doing really great work. So I hope you enjoy this week's studio update. Again, thanks for tuning in, subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, all that stuff. I'm just a teacher trying to do my thing. So thanks again. This week's technique study is a lick you can play over a 2-5-1 in the key of C. So it'll fit over D minor 7, G7, C major. I'm going to play it in all 5 positions, but first I'm just going to walk you through it in first position. So the notes are F, A, C, E, D, F, A, C, B, D, F, A, G, B, D, F, E, G, B, D, C. And that'll fit over that 2-5-1. So here is the demo up all 5 positions. A lot of students reach out to me and they tell me that they need some help filling in the gaps. And what they mean by that is that maybe they've been playing guitar for a while, but there's just some things, some fundamental concepts that they didn't learn as thoroughly or completely as they think they should have. And that's showing up as they try to become a more advanced guitar player. And it shows up because they're just not quite able to do these more advanced concepts. And it's really because they didn't learn the fundamentals, those early fundamentals, as well as they should. And that's actually one of my favorite things to teach students. So when I have a student who's been playing for a little while, I do start them on the Guitar Lesson Companion Volume 1. That's a book that I wrote a few years ago, many years ago. And when they're working through that book, I have these students who are, maybe technically a little more advanced than an absolute beginning student. I have them go through those same exercises, but I like them to treat it like they're playing these studies as part of a recording session that they've been hired for. And so when you approach your reading studies like that, it's not just a matter of, oh, I know this stuff, it's simple, I'm going to move on. But it's, can I play this as perfectly, as cleanly, as clearly, as 100% correct as possible, so that if I were being paid for my time to record this, they would get a good value out of my playing. So that's the mindset I like to help students build in themselves as they're working through these early reading studies. Things do get complicated as they go through the book, and I've always had students tell me, even students who've been playing 10 or 20 years, gosh, I never learned this stuff the right way, or I didn't perfect this stuff when I was introduced to it the first time. And they appreciate, this attention to detail and this advanced player mindset that I offer them. So my reading tip for you this week is to practice your reading studies like you are going to be performing them. And, as my students know, I do have them perform them for me during their lesson, or they can send me videos of them doing their assignments as well. But that's the mindset I really think is important to establish for beginning students, but especially those students who've been playing for a little while. They kind of know their stuff, but they don't know it as well as they probably need to know it. So a few things that I'm thinking about when I'm playing this blues. This is something that I went over with a couple of my students this week. One is I'm thinking of a blues in G. So I'm thinking of a G7, a C7, and a D7. Over that G7 chord, I'm thinking of a G6 chord. So I've got the notes here, G, B, and E. And when I take that shape and I move it down a whole step, it actually becomes a G7 chord. So we get this little movement in there. It's the same shape, but they both work over a G dominant 7, which is really handy. Now, the other way to think about these chords is that you could think of this as an E minor chord. So I have G, B, and E. So that would be with the G on as the lowest note there, that would be a first inversion, minor triad, going to a D minor triad, because I'm just moving down a whole step there, and then back up to an E minor triad. So you could think about it that way. When the chord changes to the 4 chord, which is C, you could think of this as a C6 chord, and you could think of this as a C dominant 9 chord. So I've got the notes C, E, and A, so C6, and then this is B flat, D, and G, so that would be C9. And you can see, those respective chords in there. So there's C dominant 9, and here is, a C6 chord that a lot of folks know. For the D7 chord, it's just the same fingering that I'm using for the C chord, but up a whole step. Oh, I forgot to mention, you could think of this as an A minor triad. You could think of this as a G minor triad. So kind of like how we were thinking of the G7 chord options as E minor and D minor, we can think of the C options as A minor and G minor. So I want the students who are working on that to continue to work on that. Hopefully this video helps kind of consolidate all of that information and keep you thinking about how all of this stuff is connected. So enjoy. One of my students is working on chord tones up the neck, and one of the first applications that we get to in this chord tone study, which is in volume 2 of the Guitar Lesson Companion, is the blues in C. And while it's super important to know where all those chord tones are for each one of the chords and all the positions, that doesn't necessarily bring you the music that you want. Now, those chord tones are really target notes, and I like students to be able to say the names of the notes out loud as they play them, understand the function of the notes, both, theoretically, but also by ear. And from there, I like to give them some theoretical concepts that utilize their understanding of those fundamentals to help them make better music and understand how music is created, and kind of teach their hands some places that they can go to create the sounds that they're imagining. So one of the first things I like to do with students after they can play through a blues in C just, dry, just with chord tones, is to ask them to half step into the 3s and half step into the 5s. And you can do this 2 ways. You can slide into the 3rds. So here's here's my C7 or C9 there. So that's one way I'm sliding into that E and playing a little lick from that. That's one way to do it. Now, another way to do that is to be very pronounced with those flat 3s into the 3s. So in that case, I would get that kind of sound. Or if I'm half stepping into the 5th, There I kind of used a combination. This half stepping into the 5, I was very pronounced. And then here I did kind of a quick half step into the 3rd, into the E. So those are 2 strategies that I start with students, just so that they can kind of apply some of the theory that they know. Because those chord tones, again, those are I think the most important notes you can play over a chord. You can't really go wrong with those. But they're also just really good things to have under your fingers and in your mind, so that you can apply music theory concepts to everything that you know. And then you can understand those things and transpose them and start coming up with your own ideas and be able to explain them. When you're learning licks, you'll be able to dissect them so you understand what's actually happening with those, and having a good reference to those chord tones is crucial to be able to do that. So yeah, reach out about lessons if that's something that you're stuck with right now, and I'll do my best to help you out. I'm going to share a little trick to help you remember how to figure out a major key's relative minor and vice versa. So I want to do this because the first scale that I teach a lot of my beginning students is A minor pentatonic. And I do this with an E string root scale. So my root note is under my first finger on the low E string, 5th fret. The next scale that I usually have students work on is a major scale. And here I'm going to play C major. Again, it's a 6th string root or an E string root. That pattern. Now, if you're a little more advanced, then you understand that the relative minor of the key of C is A minor. That means that they share the same key signature. All the notes are the same. They just start and stop on different notes. For A minor, it starts and stop on A. For C major, those same notes start and stop on C. So you can interchange those 2 scales when you solo. I usually leave it up to the student to use their ear to help them find the tonal center of a key. Or a piece of music. So if a song is in the key of A minor, they're going to gravitate to playing more A's and kind of things around that key. If the song is in the key of C, they're going to use those same notes and they're going to be pulled. Their ear is going to direct them to play more C major type of ideas. And that's just a kind of a natural thing that if you're listening when you're playing, if you're really tuned into your musical imagination, you'll do that automatically. But here's the little trick. So let's say I know that the song is in the key of C, and I want to figure out what its relative minor is. Now, I've already said that it's A minor, but just go with me on this. So if I put my pinky on the parent scale, and I think of the major scale as being the parent scale on this, so my pinky is on the note C, then where my first finger naturally falls, if I use the 1 fret per finger rule, my first finger falls on A. So A would be my relative minor of C major. If I'm in the key of E major and I want to know what the relative minor is, I'll put my pinky on the parent scale, that's on E, use the 1 fret per finger rule, and my first finger happens to be on C sharp. So C sharp minor is the relative minor of E major. So I hope that helps you, try to get used to playing between these 2 patterns as you're learning your first 2 scales, and I hope that tip kind of stays present with you, because that might be helpful later on. It's nice to have a little tool that you can refer to on that. I want to share an assignment that I've given to one of my students who is interested in learning how to play songs by ear. So without the internet, just listening and figuring out the chords. And it's a long process to do this. Now, my experience with doing this was way back in the day, I had a chord book and my imagination. So I would go through that chord book, and I think the chords were grouped by key. So I learned all the chords, in the key of C major, and I would just start writing songs, putting those chords in different orders. So, I would start with a C chord, going to a D minor chord, so a 1 chord going to a 2 chord, and I would write a little song. I would just kind of imagine a melody over that, start singing, and probably writing about my cat or something. And then I would do the same thing for C going to E minor, and I would write another song, C going to F, and then C going to G. And by going through that process, I really developed an ear for how different chords sound. And it wasn't an automatic thing where I could listen to a song on the radio and be able to pick it out, but it became that way as I did this in different keys, and I learned how to transpose chord progressions in different keys. That's all stuff that we cover in guitar lessons using the Guitar Lesson Companion Volume 1. But an assignment that, you might want to try for yourself is to write a song from C to D minor, so from the 1 chord to the 2 chord, or from C to E minor. They don't even have to be whole songs, they just have to be little melodies. Now, another thing that you'll find in the Guitar Lesson Companion is that I have a bunch of really common chord progressions. I think this is on my website too. And with those common chord progressions, you'll see some illustrations, some examples of songs that go from a 1 chord to a 2 chord. And sometimes just imagining that other melody, if you don't feel creative and maybe you want to use your imagination a different way, you can imagine this other song being played while a 1 chord is going to a 2 chord. So the idea is just to get used to really hearing what do melodies sound like when you're going from a 1 chord to a 2 chord? What do melodies sound like over from a 1 chord to a 3 chord, and so on. Another quick tip on this is when you are listening to music and trying to figure out what it is, if you can distinguish between a major chord and a minor chord, that's also really helpful because there are only 3 major chords in a key. So if you hear that it's a major chord, that can be really helpful for you. And I guess, a final tip I have for students who are just beginning to do this, I usually have them start in using open chords, but it's not off limits to just, if you hear all 6 strings being played and it sounds dark and it sounds like a minor chord, it's okay to say, that just sounds like an E minor chord because I hear this low E string in that. Because when I play a D minor chord, it sounds different in many ways, but in one way, there's only 4 notes being played. So it just sounds a little brighter automatically. They're both minor chords, but that E minor chord just sounds very rich. So that's not going to help you so much if you're learning a song that's using bar chords, but that's something that we as guitar players and musicians will kind of automatically do, is just kind of guess, that just sounds like an E minor chord because I hear all of those really low notes in those 6 strings. So hopefully that'll give you some ideas to maybe spark your own creativity on how you want to get better at learning songs by ear. But that's a strategy that I'm asking one of my students to do this week, just to put a little creativity into this process. My pro tip for you this week is one that I've offered before, but I'm bringing it up again because it keeps coming up. And the issue is that a lot of students feel overwhelmed, especially jazz students. When they're learning tunes, they think that they need to play, the melody in all these different places and the chords in all these different places and solo in all these different places. And they have this mountain of things that they're trying to accomplish. And yes, that's the goal. That's where we want to get to if you want to be an accomplished jazz musician, for sure, a jazz guitar player. But you have to learn it one way first. And I always come back to this. I see the overwhelm in students. I see the frustration and the self-doubt and everything. And really what it comes down to is just learning one thing really well, and then learning another thing really well, and learning another thing really well. And then before you know it, you have all of these skills. But I really like to encourage students to take a little pressure off yourself. Just learn it one way. Then you can go and play it. Nobody's going to know that you don't know it in 12 different places. But, you'll be able to play the tune, have some fun, and then you can go back into your practice studio and practice it some more another way. And, build your songs out, build your repertoire and everything out, everything that you're learning, just one step at a time.